He parted the swirling dust with every careful step, his boots crunching over shards of broken stone that had once formed the walkway of a proud alien city. Ruined archways towered overhead, half collapsed, their once majestic spires now jagged silhouettes. The sky above was a canvas of ash and swirling, burnt orange clouds that cast a dim, almost sickly light over everything. It looked as though the planet itself hovered on the brink between life and death, the wind echoing through the battered corridors like the forlorn whispers of ghosts. The traveler, Ray, was a lone human whose mission led him here, a world the authorities had long deemed uninhabitable. His face was hidden behind a reinforced visor, the tinted lens streaked with grit that had been ground into the glass by relentless winds. He could still taste the dryness on his tongue, the metallic tang in the air. Uninhabitable or not, something about this place sang to Ray's deeper instincts, as though the bones of the city were calling out for help. He paused, scanning the horizon for signs of movement, aware that he was a trespasser in a place of silent mourning. There was no sign of life, until suddenly he heard it, a faint, ragged cry that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He held his breath, straining to hear. Through the lonely gusts of wind, it came again. It was no trick of the environment. Someone out there was calling. His chest pounded, a spark of adrenaline. After everything he had survived, after all the times he had tried and failed to save those who needed him, Ray could not ignore a call like that. He moved forward, picking his way among heaps of rubble and twisted metal frames. The city had once been a place of grandeur. He could sense it. Tall walls etched with symbols of an advanced society, stone pillars that had soared to the heavens. Yet now it all lay in ruin, battered into submission by whatever cataclysm or war had befallen it. The cry came again, louder this time, and unmistakably desperate. He followed the noise through a maze of shattered structures, the remnants of plazas and courtyards strewn with debris. The stench of decay mingled with acrid dust. The deeper he went, the more his visor beeped warnings of minor radiation spikes. The entire planet was a hazard zone, supposedly deserted. Maybe this was just a salvage run turned sour, a researcher stranded. Then he turned a corner and saw her, a figure crouched under the gaping remains of an archway, cloaked in ragged cloth smeared with grime and ash. Her skin had a pale, bluish tint, with faint luminescent patterns flickering erratically across her temples. Even from a distance, he knew she was not human. An alien, a native of this ruined world, or one from beyond, just like him. Her arms were wrapped around a small bundle that she cradled against her chest, and her voice carried the raw, anguished plea that had led him here. He took one cautious step forward, lowering his weapon. "Hey," he called, his voice muffled behind the visor. "I'm not here to hurt you." She snarled in a language he did not recognize, shifting the bundle protectively. Then, in broken standard that sounded forced, she cried, "My baby won't wake up. Please help her, human." Her words were thick with desperation and an accent he had never heard. Ray's heart lurched. He had heard many pleas in his lifetime, especially back when he served as a field medic on distant colonies. No matter the accent, no matter the species, a plea for a child was universal. He removed a glove, raising his hand slowly in a sign of peace. "I'm here," he said softly. "Let me see." She hesitated, eyes bright with fear and suspicion, the faint glow in her temple veins pulsing rapidly. Slowly, though, she lowered her guard just enough that Ray could approach. He saw the child, a small, limp form with bluish skin even paler than the mother's. The child's chest barely moved, as if each breath was a struggle. Ray dropped to one knee, ignoring the shards of debris biting into his kneecap. He felt for a pulse, for any sign of life. The child was so cold. "I need to check her vitals," he murmured, lifting the child gently into his arms. Her arms were thin, nearly weightless. The mother tensed, ready to attack if he did anything harmful. Ray reached into a pouch at his belt, retrieving a portable scanner. The reading flickered uncertainly, struggling to calibrate to the alien physiology. "Hang on," Ray muttered. "Just stay with me, little one." He tried basic CPR, though he wasn't sure if it would work the same for this species. The mother hissed at him, eyes wild. Wait! But Ray pressed forward, carefully applying compressions. On Earth, he had once held a human child in a freezing colony outpost, a child who died in his arms because the med supplies arrived too late. That heartbreak had never left him. Now, he looked into the near-unconscious eyes of this alien infant, and something in him ignited. He poured all he had learned, all he remembered, into those moments, adjusting his pressure to match the child's fragile ribs, listening for a rhythm, waiting for any flicker of breath. The mother crouched close by, trembling with adrenaline. When the child let out a faint, quivering gasp, Ray exhaled sharply. She's alive, he whispered, voice tight with relief. The mother let out a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh, perhaps both. Her trembling hands hovered uncertainly over the child, as though she was too afraid to believe. Then she seized the baby from Ray's arms, cradling her tight. You really helped her, the mother said in a halting, rasping voice. Why? Ray just shrugged, heart still pounding. Because she needed help, he replied simply. The mother stared at him, eyes rimmed with suspicion, but also something else, a flicker of gratitude. She studied him as if he were some bizarre curiosity. I'm called Savara, she said at last, voice hushed. Then she bent her head over the child. Her name is El. My El. Ray nodded, removing his visor to meet Savara's gaze. His eyes were bloodshot from dust. I'm Ray. A moment of silence passed between them, heavy with all the words unspoken. The wind moaned. Ray could feel how fragile this alliance was. He was a stranger, a human, and she clearly had reason not to trust humans. But she had no choice but to let him help. Just then, a distant rumble echoed through the broken city. The mother's face grew taut with fear. She pulled the baby tighter and motioned for Ray to follow her into the deeper ruins. Hurry, she said. They're near. He didn't know who they were, but the urgency in her tone was enough to quicken his pace. Together they descended into the belly of a collapsed corridor, weaving through piles of shattered pillars. Faint luminescent crystals lined the cracks in the walls, casting an eerie pale glow that danced along their skin. Each step they took unleashed a cloud of dust that clung to their clothing, choking the stale air. The only sound was the rasp of Ray's breath and the baby's faint whimper, each so heartbreakingly fragile. Savara, Ray whispered, glancing behind him. What's happening here? I thought this place was abandoned. She shook her head, lips pursed tight. It was. My people fled or died. But these machines, they come for the survivors, if any remain. For the children. Ray felt his stomach turn. Survivors? Your people. Are you alone? Savara's eyes flashed. They forced us to leave El behind, said she was a defective strain that would endanger the gene lines. I wouldn't allow it. Now I am hunted. I don't know if any others remain, but I've never seen them. I only know there are mechanical drones out there, searching. They must not take her. She spoke with an undercurrent of defiance that almost masked her desperation. Ray nodded, a grin set to his jaw. He knew what it felt like to be on the run, outnumbered by forces that cared nothing for individual life. That was the entire reason he'd ended up here in the first place. He paused, glancing down at the child. El's small chest rose and fell in unsteady rhythms, each breath a fragile victory. Let me see if I can stabilize her better, Ray said. Savara nodded reluctantly and found a small recess in the wall, where the debris shielded them from any prying eyes or mechanical scanners above. Ray knelt, rummaging through his battered med kit. Most of his supplies were tailored to human physiology, but he had a few universal items: a mini oxygen diffuser, broad-spectrum antiseptics, and nutrient packs. He carefully tried to fit the diffuser near El's nose, hoping it would help oxygenate her bloodstream. Her tiny chest spasmed as the device hissed. Savara watched every movement with hawk-like intensity, poised to defend her child if Ray did something wrong. Each time the baby stirred, the flicker of relief in Savara's eyes was immediate but fleeting, replaced by worry that it could be snatched away at any moment. Ray could relate. He had seen parents in war zones act the same way, love tempered by the fear of heartbreak. After what felt like an eternity, Elle let out a faint sigh that sounded more stable. Her breathing, while still labored, wasn't as erratic. Ray exhaled as well, relieved. "We need to move," he told Savara. "This place won't hide us for long if those drones are scanning for life signs." She nodded, though her eyes were clouded with exhaustion. They crept deeper into the old city. Dim corridors opened into shattered atriums, half-collapsed domes, and spiraling tunnels that had once been a labyrinth of alien brilliance. Here and there, Ray spotted fragments of advanced technology, glowing power cells, half-buried data consoles, but most of it was inert or broken beyond repair. At one point, they passed what looked like a sculptural centerpiece, a towering figure with elongated limbs, carved from some dark stone, wearing a regal expression. Perhaps a memorial or effigy of a great leader. Now it lay in shards on the ground, an arm pointed accusingly at the sky. Savara paused, resting the baby against her chest. She touched one fragment of the sculpture reverently, as though it symbolized everything her civilization had lost. "We were once so proud," she whispered. Ray waited, uncertain whether to speak. Then she turned to him, voice trembling. "When I learned Aile's genome was compromised, they said I had to let her go. Genetic purists. They believed any deviation would weaken the entire species. I refused." She drew in a shaky breath, memories clearly raw. "They call me traitor. I fled, hiding among the remains of our cities, scavenging old labs for anything that might keep her alive. My home is gone." Ray tried to find words, but only managed, "I'm sorry." And he meant it. They moved on, tension growing with every step. Over the next hour, they heard the dull clanking of mechanical limbs echoing from the corridors above. Occasionally, beams of artificial light sliced through cracks in the ceiling, searching for signs of motion. But in the winding subterranean passages, Ray and Savara remained ghosts, hearts pounding as they skirted danger by a hair's breadth. A loud crash echoed suddenly, making them both jump. Something massive had collapsed not far off, and dust shook from the fractured ceiling. Savara's eyes snapped to Ray. "We must hurry." They emerged into a wide hall lined with rectangular alcoves that might once have held important archives or relics. But the place was ransacked. Twisted metal shelves lay scattered, data cubes smashed. Ray's scanner beeped faintly, picking up a small energy signature to one side. He approached a half-broken console embedded into the wall. Its screen flickered with static as he wiped away the grime. A symbol flashed, an alien script. "Might be an old medical registry," Ray muttered. "Could have some clues for how to help AEL." He tapped a few buttons, but the interface refused to translate. Then a scraping noise from behind the wall made them both freeze. Ray silently motioned for Savara to get down. She clutched Elle protectively, stepping back toward the corner. The scraping grew louder, and a metallic leg punched through a crumbling section of the wall, followed by another. Ray's breath caught. The thing was four-legged, sleek, and spider-like, with scanning rods protruding from its body. A single blue sensor glowed at its center, sweeping the area. One of the rods beeped as it detected faint life signatures. Ray and Savara exchanged a look. They needed to act fast. The drone advanced, mechanical limbs clicking on the debris. Savara adjusted her hold on Elle, her free hand dropping to the small blade at her belt. Ray gripped his sidearm. They weren't sure if the drone was armed, but it was definitely built for pursuit. A single silent moment passed before it turned its sensor fully on them. Then a high-pitched whirring erupted, and the machine lunged. Ray fired 3 quick shots, the muzzle flashes illuminating the gloom. The round sparked off the drone's chassis, leaving scorching marks but not stopping it. The machine reared back, a small turret emerging from one of its appendages. Ray threw himself sideways, grabbing Savara and pulling her down. A sizzling beam sliced overhead, carving a blackened line into the wall. Dust poured from the ceiling. The baby let out a whimper, pressed close to her mother's chest. "Get behind that column," Ray shouted, already rolling behind a fallen shelf to get a better angle. Savara sprinted across the open floor, crouching behind a chunk of collapsed beam. The drone skittered after her, apparently deciding she was the priority target. Ray cursed under his breath. He drew in a slow inhale, steadying his aim. Another beam from the drone's turret scorched across the hall, flinging shattered metal in all directions. But in that split second, Ray squeezed the trigger, hitting a small round vent on the machine's flank. Sparks flew, and the drone buckled. The turret sputtered. Taking the chance, Ray rushed forward. He delivered a sharp kick to the machine's sensor array, causing it to crash sideways, legs flailing. Then, with the butt of his pistol, he slammed down on the vent. A spurt of some oily fluid leaked out, and the drone collapsed in a twitching heap. Silence fell again, broken only by Ray's ragged breathing. Savara peered around the column, eyes wide. "You destroyed it," she said in astonishment. Ray, chest heaving, slid his pistol back into its holster. "I've had practice," he said dryly. She stepped forward, cradling El. The baby was coughing weakly, eyes shut tight. "We cannot keep doing this," Savara muttered. "More will come." Ray nodded, scanning the remains of the drone. The hull bore the insignia of some advanced faction, presumably an extension of the genetic purists who wanted El gone. "We need somewhere safer," he said. "Somewhere we can stabilize El properly." Savara looked at him, her features etched with worry. "There is a lab deeper beneath the city. Old, not used in decades, but I found partial power there once. Maybe we can do something for her." Ray nodded, the plan forming. "All right, lead the way." They navigated labyrinthine passages for what felt like hours. The deeper they went, the fewer signs of recent intrusion they saw. Savara's knowledge of these ruins proved invaluable. She knew hidden shortcuts, half-collapsed corridors that twisted beneath the main thoroughfares. She moved with a silent grace, broken only by the burden of carrying a child who was still dangerously ill. Finally, the path led to a rusted hatch near the base of a colossal, toppled statue. The alien script carved into the stone was unreadable to Ray, but Savara placed a hand on it with the kind of reverence one might show a tomb. She whispered a few words in her native tongue, then pried open the hatch. A stale rush of air greeted them, thick with dust, but noticeably cooler. A metal stairway spiraled downward into darkness. Ray clicked on a flashlight, illuminating the way. Their footsteps clanged on the steps, the sound echoing in the depths. At the bottom, a corridor branched in 3 directions, each overshadowed by gloom. "This way," Savara said, turning left. As they walked, Ray couldn't help but notice the geometric patterns etched into the walls, interlocking circles and lines that glowed faintly. "It's a nerve link," Savara explained quietly. "My people used biotech interfaces, living circuits grown to respond to certain voice commands. But most of them died when the main reactors failed." Ray ran a hand over one of the lines. It felt slightly warm, pulsing with dormant energy. "Your civilization was beyond anything I've seen," he murmured. "We were," she replied, the echo of regret in her voice. At last, they reached a heavy metal door half blocked by rubble. Ray helped push the debris aside, and the door groaned open. Inside lay a chamber that must have once been a research lab. Counters lined with broken glass tubes, data terminals coated in dust, large cylindrical tanks with webs of cracks. A flickering overhead light offered weak illumination. Savara crossed to one of the consoles, carefully setting El down on a relatively clean surface. The child gave a small cry, her face contorting as she tried to breathe. Ray moved closer, scanning the consoles for anything operational. The displays were mostly dark, but at one end of the lab, a single data screen hummed with a faint glow. "Here," he called. He carefully powered it on. Lines of alien script scrolled by, presumably status updates or error messages. "Can you read this?" he asked. Savara approached, her eyes narrowing as she deciphered the script. "It says the system is in standby mode. Limited power." She tapped a few symbols, then frowned. "It's a medical analysis module. Possibly we can run a diagnostic on Aile's vitals if the sensors are intact. Ray nodded eagerly. That might be exactly what we need. With great caution, they lifted the child and placed her on a smooth metallic platform beneath a set of blinking diodes. A faint hum started as the machine attempted to initialize. At first, the lights flickered uncertainly, and Ray worried the unit would fail. But then a gentle scanning beam passed over Aile's body. Data flickered across the screen, alien text that Savara read in quiet concentration. Her respiratory nodes are collapsing, she said, voice trembling. Her body can't process the atmospheric composition properly. She's basically suffocating. Ray swallowed. Is there a cure? Some kind of genetic therapy? Yes, in theory, Savara replied. But it's not available for her caste. It was never coded into the standard genome treatments because she was deemed unfit. Ray cursed under his breath. We need to do something. This lab, maybe it has the technology to do gene editing or at least produce a respirator that matches her physiology. Savara's eyes slid over to a row of stasis tanks, each dim. If I can salvage the equipment from one of those tanks, we might be able to build a functioning respiration chamber. It won't fix her completely, but it could buy her time. She hurried to the tanks, rummaging through the tangle of cables, searching for functioning components. Ray busied himself trying to keep EL calm, humming softly in a broken lullaby he remembered from Earth. The baby's eyes fluttered, a faint glow behind the lids, as though responding to the music. Moments stretched. The hiss of old machinery was all that kept the lab from silent desolation. Then, with a triumphant exhale, Savara pulled out a cylindrical device from the final tank. It was partially cracked, but the core glimmered with stored energy. This might work, she whispered. Carefully, she connected the cylinder to a coil of tubing that ran to the scanning apparatus overhead. She typed a flurry of commands into the console. The overhead lights flickered, and a faint blue aura surrounded the platform where Elle lay. I'm trying to adapt the stasis field to create an environment her lungs can handle, Savara explained, speaking more to herself than Ray. A spark of bright light caused them both to flinch. The cylinder spat out a shower of sparks, and one of the cables fused. Damn it, she hissed, grabbing an insulated clamp to keep the connection from burning out entirely. The power is too inconsistent. Ray jumped in to help, using his gloved hand to steady a different cable, aware that one misstep could fry the entire system. Is there another power source? He asked. Not here, Savara replied. We can't push the system too hard or it'll collapse. The stasis field flickered again. Elle's body jerked, her tiny chest contracting painfully. Ray watched, heart pounding, as the child's face contorted in silent agony. Then the flicker stabilized, and Aile's features relaxed. She was still breathing, albeit in shallow, quivering gulps, but the field was definitely helping. Savara sank to her knees, relief etched across her face. This is only temporary. We need a more permanent solution. Ray placed a hand on her shoulder, gently. We'll find it. But for now, she's alive. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes, then quickly wiped them away as though tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. The question that hung between them was whether the two of them could keep the child alive long enough to find that permanent solution. Outside the lab, faint metallic echoes resonated. Ray and Savara exchanged worried glances. She rose to her feet, blade at the ready. They must have tracked us, she whispered. Ray nodded. We can't fight them off easily, not if they come in numbers. Then we must hide, she said, or run. Ray considered the delicate wires hooking EL to the stasis rig. She needed this environment to keep breathing. They couldn't just yank her free and dash away. We can't move EL right now, he said, voice grim. If we do, it might kill her. Then I'll fight, Savara said, jaw set with fierce determination. I won't let them take her. Ray glanced at the doorway. He could hear the grinding of metal on stone. We might not have a choice, he said softly, unless we can buy ourselves time. He looked around the lab, eyes landing on a half-collapsed side corridor. There might be a way to cause a cave-in, block their path. Savara followed his gaze, realization dawning. It's risky. We could trap ourselves. Better than letting them walk right in, Ray said. I'll do it. You stay with El. Without waiting for her response, he moved swiftly. Grabbing a small charge from his pack, he placed it at a key stress point in the corridor's walls, hooking up a makeshift detonator. The plan was simple: cause a controlled collapse to seal off the main entrance. He set the timer for a short delay, then darted back into the lab. The noise in the hallway grew louder, a mechanical scuttling. Get down, Ray hissed, shielding the console and El as best he could. Savara pressed against him, weapon in hand, though they both knew a blade wouldn't help much against an onslaught of drones. The charge went off with a dull boom. The floor shook violently, overhead lights swinging. The corridor wall gave way in a roar of collapsing rock. Debris thundered down in a choking cloud of dust, sealing the entrance. Silence fell, broken only by the lab's flickering monitors. Ray coughed, trying to wave the dust away. Well, that's that, he muttered. At least we won't have a swarm of metal spiders on us. Savara's eyes watered from the dust, but she nodded. The question is, can we get out ourselves? She moved to the far side of the room, searching for alternate exits. Meanwhile, Ray checked on El. The stasis field still glowed, though flickers of instability danced across the edges. She's still breathing, Ray said, but we need to find a better power source or a more permanent fix. He lowered his voice, glancing at Savara. What about gene therapy? Some advanced procedure that might let her survive in normal atmosphere? She shook her head slowly. Even if I had the knowledge, the lab equipment is in disrepair. And to re-sequence her genome properly, we need specialized machines from the central facility. She broke off, as though remembering something painful. Ray pressed gently. What is it? The central spire, she whispered. It's the heart of the city's biotech. If any system is still operational after all these years, it might be found there. But it's also heavily guarded, or so the rumors say. The drones originate from that sector. Ray stood taller, determination etched on his face. Then that's where we have to go. We can't risk it, she said, voice shaking. They'll kill us. Or worse, they'll take El away and dissect her. Ray placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Listen, you didn't give up on her when everyone else told you to. I'm not giving up, either. If the central spire is our only chance, then we have to try. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. For a moment, she let herself lean into him, as though drawing strength from the contact. Then she nodded, steeling herself. All right, but first, we have to get out of here. She rummaged through a tangle of wires and conduits, searching for some hidden exit. There should be a maintenance duct that leads deeper underground. Maybe it bypasses the collapsed corridor. They found it behind a rusted panel in the corner of the lab, a narrow tunnel running into darkness. Before entering, Ray carefully detached El from the stasis platform. He fashioned a portable rig by merging the stasis cylinder with a spare battery pack, rigging it to supply power for a few hours. The child whimpered when he lifted her, but quickly fell back into a shallow sleep. Hold on, little one, he murmured. We'll save you. With that, they slipped into the maintenance duct. The air was stale, tinged with chemicals that made Ray's nose burn. The metal walls were tight enough that he had to turn sideways at some points. All the while, he carried El in his arms, mindful not to jostle the rig. Savara led the way, her blade in one hand. She pressed a panel that slid open, revealing a small intersection. Dim lights overhead flickered, revealing old signage in alien script. Down that way is an elevator shaft, she said quietly. If it still works, it might take us closer to the surface. They pressed on, hearts racing. The corridor echoed with every footstep, every breath. Occasionally, the structure groaned, as if threatening to cave in. At last, they reached what had once been an elevator. The doors were pried open, revealing a dark shaft. A ladder ran up the side, caked in dust. We'll climb, Ray said, shifting his hold on El. I'll go first. If the ladder breaks, throw me a rope. Savara nodded, sheathing her blade. Carefully, Ray placed his foot on the rung. It held, but the metal squealed in protest. He began to climb, rung by rung, with El cradled in his arm. Savara followed, the tension palpable in the stale air. Every few rungs, Ray paused to ensure the stasis rig was stable. The child's face was so peaceful, an odd contrast to the precarious situation. After several long minutes, they reached a half-open vent in the side of the shaft. Ray peered inside with his flashlight, revealing a corridor that looked more intact than the ones below. "This might lead us up," he said, voice echoing. They clambered inside, dropping onto the dusty floor. The corridor was eerily silent, illuminated only by flickering emergency lights. A sign on the wall depicted stylized lines that might have once directed people to different sections of the complex. Savara brushed away the dust and deciphered the characters. "Maintenance level near the outer rings," she said. "We're actually close to an exterior exit. If we can get out, maybe we can reach the spire from the surface." Ray steeled himself. "Let's do it." They pressed forward, passing empty rooms filled with rows of dormant monitors, shattered glass tubes, coiled wires. This entire facility seemed to have died a slow death, left to crumble as the city above it fell. Then a metallic clang made them freeze. They exchanged uneasy glances. Another clang echoed, closer this time. Ray readied his pistol, while Savara stood poised with her blade. Slowly, they crept around a corner, and came face to face with two more drones, hunched over a pile of debris, as if searching for something. One drone's sensor glowed red the moment it detected their movement. Immediately, it let out a digital shriek. "Run!" Ray snapped. Without hesitation, they sprinted back down the corridor, the drones racing behind them with mechanical limbs scraping along the floor. A sizzling shot whizzed past, scorching a wall panel. Sparks flew. "We can't outrun them forever," Savara gasped. Ray spotted a heavy door at the far end. In there, they dove through, slamming it behind them. Ray shoved a metal bar across the latch. The drones pounded on the other side, their shrill signals echoing. The room they had entered was large, filled with crates stacked in neat rows, labeled with alien symbols. A single hatch was set in the ceiling, presumably some kind of supply elevator. "It's locked," Savara said, testing it. "We can't get out that way." The door rattled behind them. The drones were forcing it open. Ray scanned the crates, searching for anything that might help them. One crate lay partially open, revealing small canisters of what looked like fuel cells. He recognized the universal caution symbols etched on them. "That might be our ticket," he said, grabbing one. "Stand back." Savara knelt beside El, shielding her. The door groaned as the drones pried it open, a spindly arm reaching in. Ray tossed the canister toward the doorway and fired a single shot at it. The resulting blast shook the entire room, sending crates toppling like dominoes. A wave of heat whooshed out. The drones let out digital screeches, their metal limbs clattering as they were slammed backward. Thick smoke billowed, stinging Ray's eyes and making him cough. When the smoke cleared enough to see, the doorway had been warped shut by the explosion. A piece of the corridor had caved in, burying the drones under rubble. Ray slumped against the nearest crate, heart hammering. "I guess that'll slow them down," he rasped. Savara nodded, still holding El close. The baby stirred but didn't cry, her breathing shallow. "Let's see if we can open that hatch," Ray said, pointing to the ceiling. He pulled a nearby crate over, standing on it to examine the controls. With a few attempts, he managed to bypass the lock, prying the hatch open. A rush of cooler air drifted down. "Looks like it leads to the surface," he said, relief tinging his voice. Savara exhaled, carefully passing El up to him. He lifted the baby through, then hoisted himself up. Finally, he leaned down and helped pull Savara through. They emerged in the remains of a small building that had partially caved in. Sunlight, tinted a harsh orange by the planet's thick atmosphere, filtered through a gaping hole in the roof. Debris and sand had spilled inside over the years, covering the floor in drifts. Stepping carefully around the rubble, they found a warped metal door leading outside. Beyond it, the ruined city sprawled in all its tragic majesty, columns of dust dancing in the wind. They navigated through the broken streets, each step uncertain. The wind howled, carrying flecks of ash that stung their faces. In the distance, an imposing structure rose against the sky, battered yet still upright, a great spire crowned with fractured towers. "That must be it," Ray said. "The central spire." Savara nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. If the drones are being controlled from anywhere, it's there. If they have any functioning gene lab equipment, it's there too. They both understood the risks. The spire likely housed the greatest concentration of enemy forces. But Azel shifted uneasily in Ray's arms, letting out a weak cough. The choice was clear. With the portable stasis rig's battery draining, they had no time to spare. They pressed on through the city ruins. Oddly, they encountered fewer drones than expected, as if most had been funneled into the deeper tunnels or called back to the spire. The silence weighed on them like a threat. At one point, they passed a crumbled courtyard where a statue lay half-submerged in dust, depicting a mother figure cradling a child, both with the same elongated, delicate features as Savara. A lump formed in Ray's throat, and he couldn't help glancing at the real mother beside him. Her face was unreadable, locked in her own sorrow. Finally, they stood at the base of the spire. What had once been a grand entrance was now a cracked gateway. Twisted metal beams hung overhead, threatening to collapse at the slightest tremor. A pair of defunct Sentinel drones stood guard near the entrance, their bodies rusted and lifeless. Ray stepped closer to one, giving it a cautious nudge with his foot. It toppled inert. "No power," he muttered, half relieved. They ventured inside, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The interior soared upward for hundreds of feet. Balconies ringed the central shaft, connected by spiral ramps. Broken glass and shattered railings littered the floor. Far above, a faint glow pulsed, as though some machinery still lived at the spire's core. "We should head up," Savara said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. They followed the ramps, circling higher and higher. Each level they passed contained vacant halls that once might have been research stations or administrative offices. Occasionally, a flickering holographic display would spark to life, then fade. The temperature grew cooler the higher they climbed. At last, they reached a set of double doors stamped with a glowing symbol that resembled swirling DNA strands. Savara pressed her hand to a panel, speaking softly in her native language. With a hiss, the doors slid open, revealing a large chamber that still held a faint hum of power. Tables lined the walls, loaded with alien medical equipment. Tanks, tubes, monitors, some cracked, others glowing with potential. "This must be the genetic lab," Savara whispered. A battered console in the corner flickered like a dying star. Ray approached it, carefully setting El on a cushioned platform near what appeared to be a scanning device. The child was hardly moving now, each breath dangerously shallow. "Savara, we need to do this quickly," Ray said, voice tight with urgency. She nodded, hurrying to the console. The alien text scrolled, and she began tapping commands. "I'll try to upload her genetic profile. Then, if the system can identify the defect, we might be able to run a correction sequence." Ray watched tensely as lines of data flashed across the screen. A pulsing graphic appeared, presumably a representation of Ail's genetic code. The system highlighted segments in bright red. "This is it," Savara said, pointing. Her respiratory matrix never fully developed. There's a subroutine that can resequence it, but it requires a stable environment and direct input from a gene machine. She paused, scanning the lab. There, she pointed to a tall cylindrical chamber ringed with glowing nodes. "We place her inside that. The machine will attempt to fix the defective strands. It's experimental, possibly dangerous." Ray felt a chill. "We don't have another choice." Together, they carried Elle to the chamber, carefully removing the improvised stasis rig. The child made a weak sound of protest, but her eyes remained closed. The cylinder's door slid open with a hiss, revealing a narrow bed. They laid her down, hooking up various cables. A small mask extended from the top, fitting over her mouth and nose. Savara returned to the console, heart pounding so loudly she wondered if Ray could hear it. "All right," she said, voice shaking. "I'm initiating the sequence. It'll take all the power we have left." She pressed a final command. The chamber lit up, a swirl of bright lines traveling across the glass walls. Elle's body arched slightly, as though the process was causing discomfort. Alarms beeped on the console. Ray's throat tightened. "Is that normal?" "It's rewriting her biology," Savara whispered. "There's nothing normal about this. She's basically being reborn." Another alarm blared, and the overhead lights flickered precariously. The power reserves were clearly straining. Ray sprinted around the room, searching for any backup power cells or couplings that could keep the machine running. He found a panel near the far wall, labeled with an alien symbol that might have meant emergency generator. He flipped it open, revealing a tangle of wires and a single flickering power rod. He jiggled it free, hooking it into the chamber's main feed. Sparks danced across the cables. The lights steadied. "It's holding," Savara said, breathless. Ray stepped back to her side, eyes locked on the child's silhouette within the glowing cylinder. A wave of static passed over the glass, and a line of text scrolled rapidly across the console. "It's finishing," Savara said. The cylinder dimmed, its swirling lights receding. A final beep signaled the sequence's end. Then everything went dark for a heartbeat before the overhead lights returned, weaker than before. Slowly, the chamber door slid open. Ray and Savara rushed forward. AEL lay unmoving, her small form bathed in the machine's residual glow. Savara's hands trembled as she reached for her child. "Elle," she whispered, voice cracking. For a moment, nothing happened. Ray's heart sank. Then the child's chest rose in a deep, shuddering inhale, far more robust than any breath she had taken before. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing pupils that glowed faintly. She looked dazed, but she was breathing strongly. A sob of sheer relief tore from Savara's throat as she scooped AEL into her arms. The baby let out a small cry, startled by the world around her. But it was a cry that rang with life, not struggle. Ray exhaled, a wide grin splitting his dust-streaked face. He found himself fighting back tears as well. "She's alive," he murmured. "Really alive." Savara pressed her forehead gently against Ailes, whispering words of comfort in her native tongue. The moment was cut short by a rumble from the corridor outside. They both tensed. Heavy footsteps, not the skittering of drones. Could it be living soldiers? The double doors hissed open, and a squad of 5 figures stepped inside. They wore battered armor that combined sleek alien design with patchwork modifications. Their faces, also bluish, indicated they were of Savara's species, though their expressions were grim. The leader, a tall figure with luminous lines etched along her neck, leveled a weapon at Savara. "You," she snarled. "You were declared exiled. And that," she pointed at Ul, "that child is an abomination." Savara clutched Elle protectively, fury and fear warring in her eyes. Ray instinctively raised his pistol, though he knew he was outnumbered. The leader sneered. "Put it down, human. This does not concern your kind." "I'm making it my concern," Ray retorted, stepping closer to Savara. The others fanned out, weapons at the ready. They eyed the gene machine, the still humming console, and recognition dawned in their stern faces. "You used it," one of them said, shock lacing his voice. "That's forbidden technology. You violated every code." "Your codes were going to kill my daughter," Savara spat. "I did what I had to do." The leader lifted her weapon, aiming straight at El. "Then we will finish what should have been done from the start." A trembling hush settled. Savara's grip tightened on her child, heartbreak shining in her eyes. She had come so far, fought so hard, only to face her own people's wrath. Ray felt a surge of protective rage. He lunged forward, firing a shot at the leader's arm. The blast knocked her aim off, sending her shot wide, scorching the lab wall. A chaotic firefight erupted. Ray dove behind a console, returning fire. Savara crouched low, shielding El. The baby wailed, frightened by the noise. One of the attackers charged at Ray's flank. Ray ducked and smashed the butt of his pistol into the attacker's helmet, sending him sprawling. Another alien soldier raised a rifle, taking aim at Savara. She rolled to the side, hooking the soldier's ankles with a swift kick. The soldier fell, weapon clattering. Seizing the opportunity, Savara snatched up the rifle, about to fire. But the leader pressed a blade to her throat. "Traitor," the leader hissed, eyes blazing. "You would kill your own people?" The blade bit into Savara's skin, drawing a trickle of blue-tinged blood. "You'd kill my child," Savara rasped through clenched teeth. "There's nothing left for me but to fight." In a split second, Ray tackled the leader from behind, the blade slicing the air as it was knocked from her grip. The two tumbled across the floor, grappling. Another alien soldier tried to intervene, but Savara, cradling El with one arm, fired the rifle in short bursts. Sparks flew as the soldier ducked behind a desk. Ray wrestled the leader into a chokehold, pressing the muzzle of his pistol to her head. Panting, he shouted, "Call them off." The leader glared at him hatefully, refusing to speak. The other soldier advanced with a blade. Ray fired a warning shot into the floor. "I said, call them off, or your leader dies." The soldier hesitated, glancing uncertainly at the leader. Finally, the leader spat something in their language, perhaps an order. The remaining soldiers lowered their weapons, though tension still crackled in the air. Ray slowly released his hold, but kept the pistol raised. "We're leaving," he said through gritted teeth. "We have what we came for." Savara clutched ill, her gaze darting anxiously between the soldiers. We need to get out," she whispered. Ray nodded. They backed toward the door, weapons drawn. The leader's glare burned into them, but she made no move, presumably unwilling to risk her own life. Once in the corridor, Ray and Savara broke into a run, footsteps echoing off the metal floors. Al whimpered softly, but her breathing was strong. They took a side staircase that spiraled downward. Sirens began to wail, echoing through the spire. Clearly, the rest of the forces had been alerted. By the time they reached a ground-level exit, the city outside was bathed in the deep red hue of a dying sun. The wind whipped across the open courtyard, carrying the smell of scorched metal. They pressed on, staggering with exhaustion. Over the next grueling hours, they navigated the rubble-strewn streets in search of a place to hide from the search parties that would surely come. A battered sign indicated some kind of outpost or shelter to the west, half buried in sand. They headed that way, adrenaline fueling them. Dawn found them on the outskirts of the ruined city, where the structures were fewer, but the desert sand encroached. A jagged ridge of stone provided a natural barrier, and nestled against it stood a half-intact building with steel plating that had resisted time's decay. The wide door was jammed with debris, but Ray and Savara pried it open. Inside, they discovered a small command center, presumably left behind by some expedition or military group decades ago. Dust coated the consoles, but the ceiling was intact. The structure had a supply closet with a bedroll, sealed ration packs, and a pair of solar power cells. Ray tested the overhead lights. They flickered weakly, then steadied, drawing energy from the power cells. "This might work," he said, relief saturating his voice. Savara set Al down on the bedroll. The baby had fallen into an exhausted sleep, but her breathing was strong and stable. Tears welled in Savara's eyes as she brushed her daughter's cheek, overwhelmed by a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "She's going to be okay," Ray murmured, kneeling beside them. "She's stable now, breathing on her own." Savara bowed her head, pressing her lips to Al's forehead. For a moment, the only sound was the hush of wind outside, broken by the occasional beep from the old command center. "Thank you," she said quietly to Ray. He met her eyes, a soft smile forming. "I think we saved each other." She reached out, touching his hand lightly. Her gaze flickered with unspoken emotion. Then, shifting slightly, she drew closer, leaning her head against his chest. They were both covered in grime, exhausted beyond belief, but the gesture was pure warmth. He wrapped an arm around her, and they sat there, a fragile family forged in adversity. Time passed, measured by the slow crawl of sunlight across the command center's floor. Ray tinkered with the consoles, discovering a filtration system that could process the dusty air into something more breathable. Savara sorted through battered crates, finding medical supplies that, while old, still contained a few usable items. A sense of calm settled over them, despite the knowledge that the spire's inhabitants might still come after them. For now, they had a safe harbor. Over the next days, they gradually restored the small outpost. Ray repaired a solar panel on the roof to increase their power. Savara scoured the surroundings for any edible plants or salvage. AEL recovered rapidly, her color brightening. She began to make soft, cooing sounds that melted Ray's heart. Sometimes, while Savara was out scavenging, Ray would talk to the baby in hushed tones, telling stories of Earth, of the stars, of how he used to dream of exploring galaxies. The child's violet eyes would blink up at him, as though absorbing every word. One late afternoon, Savara returned holding a small bundle of twisted, wiry stems. "Nutrient roots," she explained. "They won't taste good, but they can sustain us." She set them on a makeshift table, glancing over at Elle, who napped contentedly in a corner. "She's safe. I can't believe it." Ray smiled, offering her a cup of purified water. "We made it, and she's breathing on her own. That's the best victory I can imagine." Savara's expression softened. "You risked everything for us." "Why?" Ray hesitated, swirling the water in his cup. "Because I failed once," he said quietly. "A child died in my arms, and I couldn't save her. I promised myself never again." Her eyes glistened with empathy. She reached out, covering his hand with her own. "You kept your promise," she whispered. A week passed without sign of pursuit. Perhaps the Spire had more pressing concerns, or perhaps they deemed chasing one renegade mother and child not worth the cost. Whatever the reason, Ray and Savara took advantage of the peace to fortify the outpost. They patched holes in the walls, set up a perimeter alarm using scraps of old drone tech, and even coaxed an overgrown generator into partial function. The constant presence of each other soothed the loneliness they both carried. AEL grew stronger, laughing occasionally when tickled. She had an otherworldly beauty, with faint glowing lines beneath her skin that pulsed gently whenever she was content. Sometimes, Ray found Savara watching him as he played with the child, a soft smile on her lips. Their interactions, once marked by caution, now flowed with trust and budding affection. Late one night, they stood on a small balcony that faced the desert, the sky above strewn with distant stars. AL slept soundly inside. The air was cool, a gentle breeze ruffling their hair. "I never thought I'd feel at home again," Savara murmured, her gaze lost among the constellations. Ray slipped an arm around her waist. "Me neither," he admitted. They stood in companionable silence, hearts beating in quiet unison. Then, as if drawn by an unseen force, they leaned closer until their lips brushed, sharing a tender kiss that carried all the gratitude, hope, and fragile love that had grown between them. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his shoulder, eyes closed. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out how to build a life here," she whispered. "For AEL, for us." He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Yes, a new beginning." Morning light found them sorting supplies, discussing how best to expand the outpost's living quarters. Ray proposed clearing an adjacent room to set up a small greenhouse, using the dusty soil enriched by scraps of nutrient paste they could salvage from old rations. Savara agreed with a hopeful smile. As they worked, Elle giggled from a corner, fascinated by a patch of sunlight dancing on the floor. The child was a living testament to defiance. She was supposed to die according to her society's rules, and yet here she was alive and thriving. Midday brought an unexpected development. The perimeter alarm crackled. Ray and Savara rushed to the console. A faint blip showed on the sensors, indicating movement at the edge of the ridge. For a moment, fear coursed through them. Had the Spire's forces come to finish the job? Ray grabbed his pistol. Savara cradled EL. They waited tensely by the outpost's entrance, peering through a crack. A figure in ragged clothes stepped into view, stumbling with exhaustion. It was another alien, not quite in the same style of armor as the Spire soldiers. The figure carried no visible weapon. Carefully, Ray pushed open the door. "Identify yourself," he called. The stranger raised shaking hands. "Please," he croaked. "No harm. I'm just seeking refuge." His skin was bluish, patterns on his arms reminiscent of Savara's. He saw Ael in her arms and blinked, as though stunned. "Is that a child?" Savara looked at Ray, then back at the stranger. "Who are you?" she demanded. "My name is Kel," he said, hoarsely. "I once served in the Caretaker Guild before the city fell. I had no idea there were any survivors until I picked up a faint signal here." Ray exchanged a glance with Savara. She hesitated, then stepped aside to let Kel enter. Inside, Kel stared at El with amazement. "She's so healthy." "How?" Savara's expression hardened. "Because I refused to let her die. We used the old gene machine to correct her defect." Kel's eyes widened. I didn't think that technology was still functional." Ray offered him a cup of water. "It barely was, but we managed. Now, what brings you out here?" Kel drank deeply, then wiped his mouth. "I fled the Spire months ago. The new leadership is fanatical about purity. They forcibly screen everyone's genome, eliminating any who deviate. I couldn't stand it. I've been wandering, surviving off scraps. Then I detected your outpost's faint energy signature. I hoped to find sanctuary." Savara studied him carefully, trying to gauge if he was a spy. But his eyes were weary, his posture slumped. It was the look of someone who had lost everything. Slowly, she nodded. "You can stay here, but we can't promise complete safety. We're all fugitives to them." Kel bowed his head. "Understand. I appreciate even a day's rest." Over the following days, Kel helped them expand the greenhouse idea, using his caretaker knowledge to identify local desert flora that could be cultivated. He earned their trust bit by bit, showing genuine kindness toward El. In turn, they offered him a place among them, forging a small but supportive community in the harsh wilderness. Life in the outpost began to take on a comforting routine. Ray would maintain the solar cells. Savara tended the greenhouse. Kel mapped the surrounding area for hidden water sources, and El crawled happily among them. The child's luminous patterns had grown more pronounced, glowing softly whenever she was especially content or excited. Ray sometimes marveled at how quickly everything had changed, from a solitary mission to a fragile family, and now a budding community. However, the shadow of the Spire loomed over their daily lives. They all knew the fanatical regime might eventually come searching again. The dreaded day arrived without warning. A perimeter alarm blared mid-afternoon, more intense than before. Ray dashed to the console, where a cluster of signals flared on the sensors. "Multiple contacts," he said, voice tense. "Headed straight for us." Kel blanched. "They must have discovered my tracks." Savara's face went pale, arms instinctively wrapping around El. "We have to hide." But Ray looked at the readouts, seeing at least a dozen heavily armed troopers. "Hiding would do little good." "No," he said. "We can't outrun them. We have to make a stand." They fortified the outpost's entrance as best they could, stacking crates and reinforcing the walls. Kel found an old defense turret in a storage room and hooked it up to the main power. As the troopers approached, their formation became visible through a cracked window. The lead figure wore the distinctive armor of the Spire's enforcers, carrying a banner that displayed their genetic purity emblem. They halted at a distance, scanning the outpost. Then a voice, amplified by some device, echoed across the desert. "Savara, surrender the child. Return to the city for reconditioning. No one has to die." A tremor of fury passed through Savara. "Reconditioning," she spat. "They'd tear El apart like a lab specimen." Ray placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We won't let that happen." He peered through the scope of a salvaged rifle. "Kel, get to the turret." "Savara, stay low with El." The tense standoff lasted a few agonizing moments, until the troopers advanced in unison. Shots rang out, scorching the walls. Ray returned fire, forcing them to duck behind boulders. Kel fired the turret, a burst of energy that sent sand flying. The troopers retaliated with disciplined volleys. A sizzling beam tore through part of the outpost's barricade. Splinters of metal rained down. At the height of the battle, a projectile slammed into the outpost, rocking the foundation. A console exploded in a shower of sparks, knocking Kel off his feet. Dust filled the air. Ray coughed, blood trickling from a gash in his temple. He crawled to the console, trying to reroute power to the turret. Savara crouched in a corner, shielding El with her body. Through the haze, shapes moved outside. The troopers were closing in. "We're outgunned," Kel gasped, dragging himself upright. "We can't hold them off much longer." Ray's gaze flickered to Savara and El, then to the hallway that led deeper into the outpost. "Get them out," he told Kel. "Lead them through the back exit. I'll cover you." Savara opened her mouth to protest, but saw the resolve in his eyes. "I won't let them take Il," he said firmly. "Go." She bit her lip, tears threatening to fall. Then she nodded, pressing her forehead to his in a swift gesture of gratitude. Gathering El in her arms, she and Kel hurried toward the back corridor. Ray turned back to the battered barricade. He fired blindly, forcing the troopers to keep their heads down. He felt something deep within him, that old vow rising once more. Never again would he let a child die if he could help it. The troopers surged forward, and he retreated step by step, shooting methodically. He could almost feel their cold intent. They wanted El, but all they found was him, a lone human with too much heart, defending an alien child. The fight spilled into the outpost's main corridor, sparks flying from overhead lights. Ray ducked behind a door frame, taking out 2 troopers who tried to flank him. A third tackled him from behind, slamming him to the ground. The trooper's gauntlet pressed into his throat, strangling him. Desperate, Ray punched upward, driving his elbow into the trooper's faceplate. The armor cracked, and the trooper reeled. Ray snatched his pistol and fired. The trooper collapsed in a heap. Then the leader appeared, aiming a crackling energy blade at Ray's chest. Trapped and out of ammo, Ray stared at the blade's pulsing edge, waiting for the strike. But it never came. A shot rang out from behind the leader. The soldier froze, a look of disbelief crossing her face before she toppled forward. Behind her stood Savara, rifle smoking, tears in her eyes. "I won't lose you," she whispered, dropping the rifle. Kel stood at her side, eyes wide. The few remaining troopers, leaderless, broke and fled. The smell of burnt ozone lingered in the corridor. Ray coughed, pressing a hand to a bruise on his ribs. "I told you to run," he rasped. Savara knelt beside him, setting a sleeping Il gently on the floor, and cradled his face in her hands. "I decided to run back. Seems you needed me." A shaky laugh escaped him. He closed his eyes, relief flooding through him. "Well, thanks for saving my life." She pressed her forehead to his, voice thick with emotion. "You saved ours first, 12 times over." Kel hovered, uncertain. Then the 3 of them realized the troopers were retreating, leaving them battered but victorious. At least for now. In the aftermath, they rebuilt the damaged outpost, using the fallen troopers' supplies. The desert soon returned to its quiet hush, with no further sign of pursuit. Days stretched into weeks, and with each sunrise, Ail's bright eyes looked upon a world that had tried to deny her existence. Yet here she was, thriving and loved. Ray, Savara, and Kel learned to be a family, bound by choice, not blood. They shared meals of root paste and reclaimed grains from the greenhouse, told stories around the small generator's light, and laid the foundations of a future that would no longer be dictated by fear and oppression. At night, with the alien stars blazing overhead, Ray would hold El while Savara drifted off to sleep beside him. Sometimes, in the hush of that cosmic darkness, he marveled at how a single desperate plea, "My baby won't wake up, please help her, human," had changed everything. A short while ago, he had been lost, haunted by the past, but now he had found a purpose that burned brighter than any star, protecting this fragile new life and the mother who would do anything to keep her child safe. And in that purpose, he found hope and even love in the ruins of a forgotten world.